Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
A lot for you today. We're back in action here on a Friday, ready for the weekend. Actually, today's the final day before baseball technically kicks off. We've got some summer training games, whatever you want to call them. The Mets and Yankees are one of the games squaring off tomorrow night. I mean, I know we're both excited for baseball, but there's also been a lot of news on the college sports front, and I want to start things off there, where we've heard a lot of conferences beginning to announce their tentative plans for how to handle college sports, namely football. We've seen the Patriot League, the Ivy League, among numerous others already saying no fall sports in the fall, at least, leaving the option open maybe to try in the spring. And others like the Big Ten and the Pac-12, with their fingers crossed, staying open-minded that maybe they can play in the fall, but saying it would only be a conference-only schedule if they can. So, Tim, I mean, what do you make of it in the long run about what the feasibility of fall sports truly is?
Well, when you think about fall sports, first off, Eddie, the major sport, not to push away from any other fall sports, but the major thing you think about is college football, because that is arguably the biggest sport you have all year long until March Madness in regards to TV deals and everything else. And the thing about this is that I don't know, and I'm going to stick with what I mentioned when we talked about baseball in the past and what should have happened. I don't really think there should be a push for college football here in the fall. And just hear me out on this for one reason. We don't know what even is going on right now in the NFL. They've been very quiet about the situation. They've had plans, but they've had players catching COVID left and right. Now, you mentioned like the Patriot League. You mentioned schools and the Ivies, especially like Harvard, for example, that have canceled their year. But I think the most important thing to remember, Eddie, is that the schools that are also canceling also aren't having school students on campus in this upcoming fall semester. Now, the question is, the schools that do want to return, I find it very hard that you're going to tell me that you're going to have kids that are going to travel across the country, because some divisions, it's not like they're all in one state. You have some conferences that have multiple states involved. So you're going to tell me you're going to have kids take a bus or take a plane, travel across the state, and then you're going to tell me that they're going to follow quarantine measures while they come back to the state for 14 days, while they have a football game the next week, as well as class maybe the following day. I don't really dig that. And yes, I know in the D1 aspect, you do get some special education and tutoring, while you're with your team. But when you're back at home, you're required to be to class throughout the week. I just don't really think it's a safe option. I really think that the NCAA, and I wasn't a big fan of it at first because of the hectic schedule, but really, especially with college football, I would think about pushing it back to the spring. But I just feel like the fall is too much of a push right now, and it's not going to be beneficial for anyone. I think that if a couple of schools canceled, all should cancel. Just like last year, I had a big issue when D1 canceled all its tournaments and sports, but D3 didn't. If you're the NCAA, cancel it as a whole. Don't cancel it as 1/3.
Yeah, there's been some interesting decisions made by the NCAA over the past few months. And like you said, you want like one straight thing all the way throughout. And we're seeing like individual conferences making a call. Let the NCAA take a stand, because you're talking about how the NFL isn't saying much. Overall, the NCAA, when they've got, students' concerns in hands, they're not really, I don't know, they're not being as active as you'd think they'd be, especially like over the last couple of months. We've seen a couple statements recently, but really nothing that constructive that's come out of these statements. But there's two things I want to talk about. First things first is for college sports in general. I just personally think you need to have, classes going on actually in person before you worry about sports, because, I mean, they're still schools in a sense. I mean, that's the most important thing about a college is the schooling. Of course, with sports, you mentioned college football probably. I mean, that's the best commercial aspect of athletics for any college. I mean, just thinking about how popular college football is, in some ways it's more popular than major sports. But I think you could certainly make something work in the spring if you pushed it back. Fingers crossed we have a vaccine by then. We're seeing some good progress in the past couple weeks on that front, but I think that's the best decision to make, because once again, I think you need consistency throughout. You can't have some conferences not playing, some conferences do, because that throws everything off with what the typical college format is. I mean, I just think And all the other fall sports, I mean, it's really just college football, which is the real question here, because the other sports are the ones, I think these schools are more willing to postpone to the spring. But let's also think about something else. Out of all those sports, football is the most high contact and probably high risk one out of all of them. So I think that moving into the spring is the right decision. And like you mentioned, having just consistency between Division I, Division II, Division III, just everybody be on the same page. And the fact that we haven't heard anything about the NFL once again reinforces my point that football, I think, out of the four major sports is probably the most risky. I mean, we've heard about so many NFL players that have already tested positive, thinking about Ezekiel Elliott, Von Miller. We've heard about these college teams as well who have been doing workouts like LSU, Clemson, Oklahoma, the big powerhouses, and so many of their players end up coming down with COVID. So, I mean, and the last thing I do want to say on this that kind of ties to what you were saying earlier, I mean, it's been hard enough thinking about the NBA and the bubble. We've already seen multiple players like Rashawn Holmes get in trouble for breaking the quarantine orders. If you're having trouble with the grown adults doing that, do you really think the college kids are going to do that on a week-to-week basis? I mean, I don't see how you can keep control of this and at the same time keep control of the virus. So I think moving football to the spring with the rest of the fall sports would be the best possible answer.
I agree 100%. I mean, the way you look at it, and you mentioned it right there with the NBA bubble, I don't expect any kid, especially at the age of 18 or 19, being a freshman, not going and doing something dumb. Everyone does. It's just college. It's whatever. But the fact that you're not going to be able to keep the kids indoors. Now, I will say this too. We have to remember one thing about college football, Eddie, is that unlike any other sport as well, this is the most people you're going to have on a sideline. On college football teams, you're talking about 60, 70, even 80 people at times, and not just on a team, but being a part of staff and right there. And that creates an issue too, because all these people are transferring and moving together. Right now, COVID measures make it an issue if you have 15 plus people, within 15 feet of each other. We're talking about 22 plus players on a field less than 15 feet away of each other, if you think about it. And I just don't really think that's suitable. But another thing to as well look at is that, sure, let's say a couple of these teams have canceled out the year. But one thing that you have to remember, too, about the NCAA is you mentioned earlier about them canceling these non-conference games. Well, if you're a school, you're kind of happy to do that for a big school like Alabama, for example. Why? Because you actually pay these schools to play them, especially if they're lower tier D1 teams. You pay these schools sometimes millions of dollars just to get them on your schedule to play them before you play conference games. I think this year, if the NCAA is to happen in the fall, you're not only going to see a lot more teams happier because they're doing that, but then when they play conference play, there's going to be more of an emphasis on, I guess you could say, tighter games. I think you're going to see good teams actually struggle a little bit because of this. So it could be an interesting season, but again, safety comes first. I just feel that you got to put the players' thoughts and minds in number one, because if they're not healthy, then what product do you have? And I know this was a big year for NCAA players, because this is the first full year you could actually make money in the NCAA. Obviously not being paid by the NCAA, but in terms of, jerseys and everything else. So a huge opportunity for them to make money, but you're going to have to miss out, extend it one more year.
Yeah, and like I said, I still think the spring is the most logical option, but you made a good point too about, I mean, the reason those matchups you see Jackson State or Charleston Southern playing against an SEC powerhouse getting killed by 60 points, it's not like they're just willingly doing that to get murdered and manslaughtered in a game. They're doing that because they're getting money. So a team like Alabama or Georgia that don't have to make those sacrifices, I mean, in a way that's kind of good for them. And I think the one problem that we're going to find, even if the season gets pushed to the spring, is if there's really consistency between all these conferences. Because once again, this is a 50-state deal, all these different colleges involved, all different regions of the country. I mean, even if we have a vaccine, and personally, I don't want to get full-on political here, but there's going to be people who are going to be afraid when the first vaccine comes out to take it initially because, I mean, they don't know if they're going to trust it. And then there's the anti-vax people who don't want to take one in general. So I feel like that's going to be a whole other issue at the same time. And that's going to be a regional thing as well. So trying to make something that is concrete and consistent through the entire country for the NCAA is going to be difficult enough. But you talked about that motivation for the players now that this year they have the ability to make money playing in the NCAA for the first time. They sure want to get out on the field. And the coaches too. I want to just say, because I've been following this the last few days and seeing what some of the coaches have been saying. And, a few months ago, the only person who was really about this was like Mike Gundy. And we got into him a few episodes ago because he's an interesting character. But we're seeing some of the big coaches as well. Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma about how he really wants to get this season in. Coach O, the defending champ with LSU, saying how football is, quote unquote, the bloodline of our country. Well, guess what? The bloodline's not healthy if you're playing football during a pandemic. So I don't know what's really going to come of this, but I think we can both agree that at least I think the right decision is not to play college football in the fall.
Well, and I do want to say one more thing, too, when you think about it, Eddie. I mean, just imagine this. When we think college football, you think about, how it carries through December and you have the college playoffs and everything. But if you just push it back to the spring, after the NFL season's over, for example, we don't really have a gap or anything till the NFL draft. I feel that if you play football in the spring, I think your draft stocks actually raise a bunch too for players that have the capability of getting drafted. I think as a fan, it gives you more to look forward to because you're going to have players finishing up their seasons in the NCAA, and then 2 weeks later, they're getting drafted to the NFL. So I think there would be a continuation there, and you don't feel like you're missing out on football, but you're actually still having it, and the fan gets all of what they want, which I think would also be huge as well.
And for the average sports fan, too, thinking about, there's people who are like, there's going to be devastated if there's no football. Think about how literally every other sport's going to be going on in August and September. I was looking at just thinking about the month of September. You're going to have the NBA playoffs. You're going to have the NHL wrapping up, baseball going on, and a pennant race. You've got 2 legs of the Triple Crown for horse racing. You've got tennis majors, golf majors. I mean, so many different sports going on. It's not like just no football means there's going to be nothing going on in the fall. Now, one thing to brush off on this that I want to ask you your opinion on. We've heard about, and specifically in New Jersey, I've been following the NJSIAA, who are the sanctioning body for high school sports in New Jersey. And one of the proposals they had was a complete flip of the spring and fall seasons that some people were considering for a couple of reasons. One, to ensure that, football goes on in the spring. And secondly, because a lot of the spring sports, at least, baseball, golf, tennis that a high school offers, and I mean, it's the same thing in college, they're low risk sports. There's not as much contact in them. And this week I was actually covering the Last Dance World Series, which is a high school baseball tournament in New Jersey where there's like 200 schools involved. And I saw the precautions being taken. Every player was getting their temperature checked before taking the field. Everybody spread out, social distancing. For the most part amongst fans, not everybody was obeying, but almost the vast majority were trying their best to do that. The governor, Phil Murphy, was actually very outspoken about how happy he was that this was succeeding. Do you think it's feasible that you could move the spring sports to the fall to the spring, and just at least still have 3 seasons of NCAA sports, just not in the same order?
Well, for high school sports, I think that's an easy option, Eddie. But for the NCAA, there's a lot of things that would have to go down to ultimately, make that possible. Because another thing to remember, too, and I'll utilize soccer as an example. Some teams, especially in the NCAA level, will play soccer in the fall, and then they also have a spring soccer that's not NCAA sanctioned, but like how, for example, with football, how it's almost like a spring training version, but they continue to play games and such to continue to stay in shape. Now, for baseball, it could work, but at the same time, for the NCAA, there's so many other things. I don't really see how you get an NCAA tournament in, though, because in high school, sure, you can have a 2-month season almost like it is in the spring. But in the NCAA, Eddie, especially in the D3 level, you play 40 games for a regular season baseball season at times before the playoffs. In softball, teams play 30 to 40 games as well before you even head to the playoffs. unless they're going to be playing in a dome, I just don't see it feasible for them to play in the fall, because that means they'd be finishing the Division III tournament, for example, come December or January. I mean, they're literally the NCAA D3 this year softball tournament wouldn't have ended until about a month and a half after I graduated. So to me, I just don't feel like it's feasible with winter that would really be coming up. And this is my thing as well, playing baseball in an adult baseball league where we agreed to have the league continue over, not have a fall season, but carry through the fall, is that we could be ending our regular season first week in November. And from personal experience, when it's windy out and it's like 15 degrees, you don't want to be playing baseball out there on the diamond, even if you're a professional for that matter. So to me, I feel like you don't really know what the season's going to bring come November, which creates a lot of huge risks, because also playing baseball out in the cold actually creates more injuries, and it's been proven.
And the one other thing, and then we'll move on, that I do want to say, because I kind of agree with you. I heard about this idea, and there's a second problem brought up too, because also with COVID as well, if there's a spike in certain areas and you have to postpone, and you've got these people who already had their spring season canceled last year, then are trying to play in the fall, they get screwed over twice in a row and miss out on seasons. So it's gonna be interesting to watch what happens in these next few weeks. We've already seen one by one, we're seeing conferences making statements. I want to see what Mark Emmert says in the next couple days as well from the NCAA standpoint. But speaking of making statements, there was an important one made by Dan Snyder today, and the Washington football team, formerly the Redskins now, they're in the news again, and not about their Native American nickname. It's instead a Washington Post article where 16 women have accused the organization of issues of sexual harassment, demeaning comments towards them. People who have worked in the organization, reporters and such, from scouts and other people that work, not Dan Snyder, not Bruce Allen, but other higher-ups in the organization have been named in this. And it's been going on, supposedly. First report is as early as 2006. Last report is as recent as last football season. So as if things couldn't get any worse for this Washington team with them being in the news and having to change their nickname and everything. Now they've got this whole other scandal that Dan Snyder has to try to work his way around.
Yeah, I just don't really know what to think at this point. Dan Snyder has had an interesting past, quite frankly. And to be honest, I didn't really hear about most of the stuff until this past week. I mean, all the stuff Dan Snyder's done in the past really must have gone under a blanket, because usually when you hear, for example, sex scandals, if you're telling me, for example, the Kraft family couldn't, needless to say, escape that, and that's still a big story to this day, that the Redskins could, sweep it under the rug. I mean, Eddie, these are huge allegations, and not because of the trafficking thing. I mean, that its own insane allegation. But we're talking paying off referees. We're talking about, trying to have an impact on the football game. Now, let me tell you this, not to be funny, but considering the fact that if this is true, that is probably the worst return on investment I've ever seen in my life, considering the fact that the Redskins haven't won since Joe Gibbs. But also the fact of this, too, that, why? Just simply why? It's not morally right. And on top of it, I would imagine the NFL doing a deep research in this, because this alters the football game. This, has a major impact on football's history. And I don't see Roger Goodell sitting down and being quiet about this. And quite frankly, this could be almost bigger than the Houston Astros situation for banging trash cans back in 2017. This is a big deal, not just because of the simple sexual, trafficking allegations, but again, in terms of football, this is huge, man. I don't really know what to think about the situation. To me, it scares me personally, but also for the sport of football, this is a threat, and it needs to be handled.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the NFL fortunately has not had many issues like this, at least that we know of in the past. But this, of course, would be a scandal of the century, if that is true. What we do know is definitely true, though, is this sexual harassment scandal involving several different employees in the past 15 years in Washington. And I don't know. You're a Giants fan. I'm an Eagles fan. I mean, we both follow the NFC East very closely. And what I've always seen, I feel like, with Dan Snyder and the Redskins, is that he's like a Jerry Jones wannabe in a way. He wants to have that full control of his football team. He wants his team to have success. He wants to be the big face, you know, how popular Jerry Jones is amongst the folks in Dallas. But he's popular because of all the success Dallas has had. I know it's been a long time since they've won a Super Bowl, but they've been a competitive, great team nonetheless. Washington, I mean, in the last 15 years, other than one decent year with Kirk Cousins and the one good year with Robert Griffin III. I mean, they have not been that competitive since, like you said, the days of Joe Gibbs when they won the 3 consecutive Super Bowls, and that's a long time ago now. But something interesting that Ron Rivera said, actually in response not just to the name change, but to this recent development, is about the need for a culture change, which when this all blows over, I'm starting to think that a name change, an identity change, might actually be a blessing in disguise for this Washington franchise if they are not and just forgetting about the whole name thing at this point. If this is as big of a scandal as what is rumored, and even if it just works out that that's not true and it's just the sexual harassment thing, just an overall culture change between the name and trying to get rid of that, and Ron Rivera really stepping up. And think about it, he still hasn't even coached a game on the football field yet for Washington, but he's becoming so active because I think he notices some flaws in the higher-ups with Bruce Allen and with Dan Snyder. I mean, I think he really wants to step up and make changes and make this Washington franchise better. But I think in the long run, just thinking literally, like this name change might actually symbolize a much bigger cultural change that the Redskins or the Washington franchise, I'm going to keep messing that up, so desperately need.
Well, and you know what I noticed, Eddie, if you think about it, Ron Rivera in particular always seems to get stuck in sticky situations in terms of when he gets hired. For example, back in Carolina, when he first came there, it was a pretty sticky situation that he was thrown in the middle of, and he made the best of it. To turn around and make a team a Super Bowl contender is, remarkable. And the fact that he did it with Dave Gettleman, as a Giants fan, that's huge because I'll tell you, not a lot of people can stand Dave Gettleman. But I will say this, for Ron Rivera wanting to make an identity change, it's a must-see down. The fact that and we mentioned this on the last episode, Eddie, where it's good that he's having a say in this because this is a huge step for everyone in general, that it's no longer going to be the Redskins, but perhaps something else. And I can't wait to see the name change for the record. But the fact now that we have, 10 days until camp begins, you gotta let us know soon, Washington, because I'll tell you, your facility is not going to be done in 6 days if you don't let them know soon. And your stadium especially is not going to be done if you don't let them know soon. But this situation is just, it's mind-boggling. It really is. But when it's all said and done, Ron Rivera is going to be the man that has to take charge and show that he's unique in wanting to make a difference. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing the good side of Ron Rivera outside the coaching perspective. He realizes a lot of things, and that's what makes him a really good football coach. And even when he struggled in Carolina, that's why he wasn't thrown to the curb. And you're starting to see he's a genuine person. He's a great coach, cares about his players, and now he's here with Washington. And I think the most important part, and this is what, Eddie, what I'm wondering what you think. I wonder if he really talked to his players about the situation, which is a big reason why he's taking a big push about an identity change like this as well, considering the fact of everything that's going on over the past few weeks.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's talked to the players. I mean, he's a very outspoken person and really just it's mind-boggling, like you said, what's going on. And he really just wants to make a change here. And it's just it's just really shocking. And when you think about just the Washington organization of the last few years, I'm just thinking about on the football field, regardless of anything happening off the field with the name, just thinking about the team itself, how many changes it's undergone, all the different coaches they've gone through, the Jay Gruden era, the Mike Shanahan era, neither of those really much to celebrate, all the different changes at quarterback, of course, the whole incident with Alex Smith that they've also had to deal with over the past couple of years with his devastating injury. It's been a lot of misfortune for this team. And like you said, Ron Rivera stepping into another sticky situation. He entered a Panthers team that was not very good, coming off the days of Jake Delhomme as their quarterback, with Jimmy Clausen over there. And then Cam Newton steps in, and he's got Luke Kuechly, he's got Jonathan Stewart, and suddenly that team, he makes them a Super Bowl contender, and they almost won that Super Bowl 50 in San Francisco against the Broncos. So I think they're going to be heading in the right direction. I think Ron Rivera is going to be very active in talking to the team. But the real question right now, Dan Snyder's still the number one guy. He's still in charge of this team. He's made a statement already today on the situation, but what is he going to do going forwards to help fuel change? And this is a lot more than just changing the nickname of the team. This is about the overall culture of the team. And this is not the first time we've heard about organizations that have been caught up in corruption, not just with sexual harassment or with, obviously with the Astros, with interfering with, the games themselves, with the banging with the trash cans. But I feel like also if Dan Snyder does not address this right, he's going to be in even more trouble, because just recently we've seen a major sport with the Houston Astros where we've seen Jim Crane really not doing too good with his statements. Same with the players. And if Dan Snyder has not caught in that wind and is still acting that same way, it's going to make him look even worse. But enough speculation for now. We're going to have to pay attention as more information comes through. And, of course, we got to move to NASCAR because there's a lot that I want to get to here before we wrap up today. First thing I want to turn to you, because I know you're the eNASCAR Heat Pro guy. I saw they were at Road America, and that race was interesting. I just saw a bunch of clips on the Twitter of a bunch of guys going flying off the track. So maybe you could tell us a little about that.
Oh man, I don't. Did you see my clips on Twitter taking the jabs at Stuart Haas Esports? Let's put it like this: I will never take a jab at the NASCAR Heat Pro League, but man, were both of those races a disgrace yesterday. To be honest, and you look at it, no one is driving each other with respect right now. Yeah, Dan, who came here on the podcast a few weeks ago, he turned around and was having the race of his life, looking to sweep the road courses on the year. He had a 5-second lead at one point, and the yellow came out because Garbage ended up hooking off a turn. I believe it was turn 1 the first time, and ultimately brought out an incident. So they restacked the field. Then all of a sudden, pandemonium broke out because Matthew Selby started third. Now, he is on Stuart Haas Esports, as to mention, in the number 4 car. He just came off a week where he had a 20-point penalty. 20 points, the first one to ever even get penalized in the Pro League in regards to more than 5 points. And he got penalized 20 points. Well, he goes into turn number 1, full sends Justin Brooks, moves Daniel Buttafuoco as well out of the way as a result of that. And all of a sudden now he's in the lead and he's creating mayhem behind him. Justin Brooks has said for the last 3 weeks that he's had a one coming for him. And needless to say, they go down the long stretch, get ready for that hard left corner into the Corvette corner. And Justin Brooks hooked him. Now, it was bubble. I went back and saw the video. He did bubble him, but man, was that a timely hook. He had one coming for him, and he spun Selby head on to the outside wall. And this was the beginning of mayhem. And that end, I don't know if you saw the end of that Xbox race in particular, Eddie, but man, was that a finish. Last corner move, Justin Brooks gets around Sam Morris, who's had a season to forget, to say the least. I mean, what a finish. Brooks gets him in the last corner to move on to win. Now, I'm sure there's going to be penalties coming on that side. And just when we thought the PS4 race was going to be calm, relaxed, and good, as it was for the first 8 laps, all it took was Maxwell Castro's Fanatec and his gears to disconnect and create a wreck, it brought out more pandemonium. You saw Brandon Grittenden, the teammate of Matt Selby. He created an issue. He moved Red out of the way, and Red, who is everyone's community favorite in the Pro League, nothing given, takes him right back because he said the next time the 14 does that, he's going to the wall. Well, Red, being the outlaw he was, sent Outlaw Racing to the wall, and again, pandemonium broke out. And at the end of it, yet again, not to say an undeserving victor won, but Josh Parker, the only one who didn't get in anyone else's mess, went on to win the race for the second week in a row. And by the way, he looks like he's going to clinch his way into the championship after having a terrible start to the season with a 31-point lead going to the final week of segment 3. I mean, it was a crazy race.
I mean, and it's Road America too. I mean, you got to take that at least with some grain of salt too. I mean, that's the toughest road course I think there is to try to figure out. I mean, there's so many different corners. There's the high speed parts. There's the huge chicane right past the Speedville sign. And of course, that tight left-hander. I think that's turn 3 after the string cheese sign. I mean, that track, and it's so long too. I mean, 2-minute laps. It's a tough track. But I'm going to focus now to the actual NASCAR world where Bristol, the All-Star race, I don't know. It didn't have the chaos or the excitement that a lot of people thought. Chase Elliott did get the win, and we saw one guy even climb the fence in excitement. There was a lot of problems I had with this race. I mean, first of all, the Open, of course, now Michael McDowell is seen as like the Antichrist or something because of the Bubba Wallace incident. I did love how Bubba Wallace left his front bumper over by Front Row Motorsports. I think that's going to be an interesting battle to follow along.
I would like to start with that. Let me ask you, what do you think? Do you think McDowell intentionally hooked Bubba, or did he react? I still think differently than most people, but I don't think he intentionally wrecked Bubba.
I completely agree. I do not think he intentionally wrecked Bubba. I think he's really just being, I don't know, he's really being vilified by everybody right now. I mean, given the circumstances of Bubba Wallace, and, you know, everybody wanted to see Bubba in the Open. And what surprised me most during the whole thing was because a bunch of people were like, oh, Bubba would have won the fan vote. Bubba actually didn't even win the fan vote, regardless of whether he had a wrecked car or not. Supposedly Clint Boyer just won it clean straight through with the number of votes he had. But, I mean, just overall, you know, Bubba was going to he was willing to give the bumper. He wanted to get into that all-star race, and he was going to try his best and to get taken out in that situation. It has to be frustrating for him. But I really don't think this was Michael McDowell's fault. Well, I mean, it was his fault, but I don't think it was anything intentional for sure.
Yeah, you know, to me, what it looked like is that Michael McDowell was, as a result, because I believe he got hit by Bubba. We didn't get to see the replay, but going into that corner. And I think he thought he was going to plow the outside wall coming off of 4, which is why he yanked the car left and part of a reaction. It wasn't an attempt to wreck Bubba, but more of an attempt to, you know, save himself from destroying a race car. And he kept his foot in it as a result. And unfortunately, he got him tangled up and wrecked anyways. Then ultimately, he would bring out the next yellow as well. But I will say this, you know, as much as people want to vilify Michael McDowell, it's not really worth it. I mean, the guy has had a clean racing record. He's had some scary incidences over his career. Let's not forget about, you know, the whole qualifying scenario for Michael Waltrip Racing. Mm-hmm. But, you know, when it's all said and done, everyone knows his intents. From some guy that, especially at short tracks, is running top 10 almost every single short track this year in an underfunded team, why would he come to an all-star race with an intent to just wreck someone? I don't think this is supposed to be for fun. And I mean, sure, we've seen the Bud shootouts create some interesting arguments before the Daytona 500 in past years. But again, I mean, I just don't really know. You know, the all-star race now in general, I will say this, very boring. Yeah. Wasn't at all near expectations. The Open was more exciting than the race itself. And that mostly had to do, obviously, because the McDowell-Bubba drama. But I just don't like – I mean, Bristol, don't get me wrong. I like the fact it was at Bristol. The segments, though, you can't do a 15-lap last segment. I think I mentioned this the last time when we brought it up. I'd like to see 30 laps. 2 tires ultimately win the race over 4 because all that mattered was track position. There was no mix-up thrown into it. There was no, hey, put the guys in the rear up to the front, invert the field. That stuff didn't matter. All that mattered was if you had the track position, went on to win that race. And I mean, Chase Elliott, don't get me wrong, he had the car to beat. He went out and he dominated that race, so well-deserved for him. But man, I mean, this is supposed to be a for fun race, and there was nothing really fun about it.
And for NASCAR, all they got to be saying is thank goodness Chase won, because that got a lot of people, in favor of what happened in the race, because all the other gimmicks that they threw in, and you know what, you can make the All-Star race gimmicky. It's an All-Star event. Thinking about the NBA All-Star game this year, how exciting that was when they changed everything and first team to 24 in the fourth quarter is the winner, and how crazy that got to the end when it came down to free throws and everything and reviews. The Pro Bowl, of course, has gotten gimmicky. I mean, not as many people really watch the Pro Bowl, but the NBA All-Star game, sometimes baseball too, can get a little funky with the All-Star game. But you know what? You can do that. You can do those types of things. And, they tried, but I don't think any of the gimmicks really paid off. Let's go through each of them. First of all, they bring back Darrell Waltrip, but he mistimes boogity, boogity, boogity and does it a lap too early, and then he has to do it a second time. That was a mess. So that's part one. Then the glow lights under the cars. I thought this was going to be something cool. Looked like the Cars in the Cars movie when they're driving down the highway. No, they're these little things in the back that look like, a broken Christmas tree light in the back of the car. So I don't really know. And we heard Kevin Harvick say about how he wished, quote unquote, his would just fall off in the race. I mean, I don't think that really paid off. The choose cone, this is going to go to my point in a moment, but overall with the choose cone, one of the problems was that I felt like TV didn't really cover it that much. They didn't tell you about all the strategizing of deciding what line you wanted to be in, but that goes to my further point that I'm going to get to in a moment. I do like some of the paint schemes they did with the car number, moved from the door to the panel. But you know what? I want to be honest here. That's the least important of any of these things, because, that's just what the car looks like, that with the glow lights. The more important thing was the choose cone and the actual racing. And that's the whole problem here. Bristol is so good in 500-lap races for 2 reasons. One, because it's 500 laps, so the field spreads out, you get lap traffic. And lap traffic is what makes Bristol exciting, because you got to navigate it. How many times have we seen a leader taken out by a lapped car and frustration that comes from that? So that's part one. Part two, you need the high groove to come in. You need Bristol. The reason why Bristol is often better than Martinsville in races is because the 2 grooves work. Martinsville is more of just bump and run to get to the bottom. Bristol, as the race goes on, and that's the headline, you can make the high line work, but that usually takes at least until the end of the first stage for that to get in, sometimes even towards the end of stage 2. That didn't happen because this race was so short. And a 15-lap segment, that's 4 minutes at Bristol. That's not that long. I mean, you could have made this race a little bit longer. I really don't see why you couldn't have extended this a little bit, and make these segments a little longer. And I don't know. You don't need all these segments too. You can make this 2 stages and then the overall finish. You don't need to make it gimmicky with a bunch of segments, because guess what? You've already brought the gimmickness into the regular sport with stages every single week. But the whole fact of the matter is, I think the race could have been longer. I think Bristol is a good place to host the All-Star race compared to a track like Charlotte, because there is going to be excitement, but it just, I don't know, it didn't really come together this year.
Yeah, the race didn't even add over in terms of distance to an hour and a half. And I actually did time out exactly that final segment, Eddie, from start to finish. And it was, I believe, 4 minutes and 47 seconds. So, again, 15 laps. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see 15 more laps, in my opinion, because you saw guys like Kevin Harvick, for example, that were on fresh tires and coming. They never had an opportunity to get up and catch the field. But I knew also at one point maybe where you knew this race was going south. I think it was at the end of segment 1, maybe towards segment 2, where Ryan Blaney stayed out on old tires while everyone else was on fresher tires around him. And the fact that he stayed in the lead for as long as he did was astonishing, because you would think fresher tires, especially Keselowski on 2 lefts and Chase Elliott on 4, would catch him right away. But that wasn't the case. And Ryan Blaney ultimately benefited because of this. And it proved that this race wasn't going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating as a NASCAR fan, because there was so much hype going into this All-Star race ever since it was announced back in May. It was heading to Bristol. But there's also room for improvement. I think we've learned if we do glow lights, either the entire car or just get rid of these things. That's pointless. Worry about the racing before how shiny the cars look.
Now, I do want to ask one more question before you move on. When you look at the All-Star race in general, and I know we've been talking about the gimmicky aspect, but do you feel that they should make it more of a gimmick to, I don't know, maybe go to different tracks compared to Charlotte? I mean, should it stay traditional, although Charlotte's been lackluster in its racing as well? Or do you try to go to the tracks? Because Tyler Dohar on the eNASCAR Pro League brought up a very good point that I'd like to see. How about you go to a place like Talladega, give $1,000 for every single lap led. Let's say if you do, I don't know, up to $150 laps total. Let's say actually that's a lot of Talladega, so let's just say 100. Okay, let's say you do 100 laps at Talladega. At most, okay, it's $100,000 for each lap led. Then you also turn around 25 cars, whatever the limit is that was this year. But you also eliminate the stages, and it's more of a pack style race like we got to see this year at Talladega.
Mm-hmm.
I think there would be a lot more exciting racing. And quite frankly, I mean, this year's Talladega was probably the best race we saw all year long. I'm not saying go to Talladega, but I would like to see them at different tracks where they change the system up a little bit and put more on the line, because I feel these drivers, if you're not a part of a big team, are just kind of here to be here because they're getting nothing out of it other than showing off for their sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, I think the All-Star race is where you can be goofy. Honestly, way back when, I thought about the Roval when they first rumored that. That would be a good thing to do for the All-Star race, as something as a gimmick, sort of. But I kind of like that idea about Talladega. But I think Bristol's a track that you need 40 cars at. You need a longer race to be able to get that high groove in. And, I mean, talking about a race that might be a bit of a letdown, this Sunday, wrapping things up today, NASCAR goes to Texas, where the last couple years, other than a couple of big wrecks we've seen there in the past, 3-4 years, there hasn't been that much excitement that's really happened on the track there. There's been a lot of spread out racing. It's been one of the more letdown mile and a halves that we've seen over the past few years. What do you expect to see in that race?
To be honest, I expect to see a lot of tire issues, and that's the one thing where you think about for Texas that's been a thing of the past. A lot of, in particular, right rear tires are going to come to, needless to say, a cord and end up shredding. But, I don't really know. Texas is a unique track. It's generally really loose. You have to drive off the edge, as they have for years. But he hasn't really created a good race. I think the last good race at Texas I can think of is maybe the year Greg Biffle won. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a very, very long time since I remember a good Texas Cup race. Now, truck races have been good at Texas. That I will say, believe it or not. But when you go to Texas, it's just like Atlanta to an extent, where not to say Atlanta's been boring, because Atlanta isn't boring, but it's 8 cars finishing on the lead lap. It's either you hit the setup or you miss, and you're going to be laps down. And even Homestead was the same way as well, where only 8-9 cars finished on the lead lap. I think that whoever you see up there on the track early is going to probably be there towards the end. And I'm not really looking forward to Sunday, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of Texas. Even under the lights, it hasn't been a good race. And it's a track that not only, I don't know if they have fans in this year, Eddie. Maybe you can confirm that. But it's a track where not many fans go to begin with all the seating capacity they have. I really think it's a track that will be off the schedule in the next few years.
Yeah, and it's surprising because you think NASCAR would be so popular in Texas and places like that. And really, honestly, in Texas, especially at Texas Motor Speedway, we just don't really see that. But this weekend might not be great, but we've got some good tracks on the schedule coming up. Kansas, Daytona regular, and Daytona road course coming up in the next few weeks. Those are some tracks that always bring the action. So that'll be fun to watch. So next week, we're going to try to get a guest in the next few days for one of the shows next week. We'll keep you posted on that on our Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. Also on Thursday, we will be doing our baseball preview More so, we talked about our playoff teams, talking about awards, our World Series picks, because the season begins on Thursday. But that'll wrap things up today. We hope everybody has a great weekend. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And this is Sports Speak. Have a good day, everyone.